You tell yourself it's just desire, a pull, a craving, a spark between bodies. But what if I told you it's not lust at all? What if what you're really chasing is something much deeper, much quieter, and far more dangerous, the emptiness you refuse to face? Lust often arises not as a simple sexual impulse, but as a complex psychological phenomenon, specifically a projection of the shadow self. In the depth of our unconscious lives, the part of ourselves that we refuse to confront, our insecurities, unmet needs, fears, loneliness, and unresolved wounds. When we do not engage with this inner material, it does not disappear. It operates from behind the scenes, influencing our thoughts, emotions, and behavior in subtle and often misleading ways. Lust, in this sense, becomes a vessel through which the unconscious seeks wholeness, not through integration, but through externalization. Imagine someone who has spent years suppressing their feelings of worthlessness. Rather than facing the pain, they keep themselves distracted, numb, and disconnected. The psyche, however, cannot be silenced indefinitely. It wants healing, completion, acknowledgement. And so, when this person encounters someone who embodies what they feel they lack, confidence, beauty, emotional vitality, their unconscious responds with intensity. The longing they feel toward this person may seem purely physical or romantic, but it is in fact far more symbolic. The other becomes a carrier of the qualities they have disowned within themselves. The shadow, when not made conscious, is projected. What we cannot accept within ourselves, we try to find or fight in the outer world. In the case of lust born from emptiness, the projection is not just of repressed desire, but of deep psychological hunger. We want the other, not merely because we are drawn to them, but because we believe, often unconsciously, that they can make us whole. The intense sexual or emotional craving, then, is not really about the other person at all. It is about the parts of ourselves we have lost contact with. The sexual impulse is merely the mask. This explains why lust rooted in projection is often insatiable or fleeting. Once the act is over, the craving returns. It's not because the desire was not fulfilled, but because what we were seeking was not sex. It was self-recovery. The body was used in an attempt to fill the hole in the soul. But no amount of external stimulation can substitute for the work of internal integration. And so, the cycle continues. We move from one encounter to the next, confusing desire with destiny, pleasure with purpose. Even more, this projected lust can attach itself to people who are emotionally unavailable, toxic, or fundamentally incompatible. That is because the unconscious is not necessarily looking for happiness. It is looking for familiar patterns, even if they are painful. If someone carries the emotional imprint of a wound we have not healed, perhaps neglect, abandonment, or rejection, they will draw us like a magnet, not because they are right for us, but because they reflect something unresolved within us. In these situations, lust becomes a reenactment of the original pain, not a path to connection. To recognize lust as shadow projection is to begin to reclaim our power. When we realize that our intense craving may actually be a form of psychological displacement, we gain the opportunity to step back and reflect. What is it about this person that captivates me so completely? What do they represent to me on a symbolic level? What part of myself have I lost, ignored, or rejected that they seem to embody? Only when we begin asking these questions can we see through the illusion. The person we lust after is not our missing piece. They are a mirror, showing us the work we still need to do within. By bringing awareness to this, we can begin to integrate what we project, reclaim the lost parts of ourselves, and transform our desire from compulsion into conscious choice. The experience of intense desire for another person often carries with it a compelling illusion that the presence of the other will complete us. This illusion is not born from true emotional intimacy or authentic connection, but from the unconscious mind's search for wholeness through an external figure. When someone is emotionally or spiritually fragmented, they may unknowingly project their missing parts onto another, idealizing them as the solution to their inner lack. The person they are drawn to becomes a symbol, an archetype, a vessel through which they hope to attain internal balance and meaning. The powerful emotional and physical attraction is not simply about who the other person is, but about what they represent to the psyche. At the core of this projection lies a misunderstanding. We do not recognize that the qualities we admire or obsess over are actually reflections of parts of ourselves that have gone unacknowledged or undeveloped. When someone seems to radiate strength, joy, mystery, or completeness, we may feel captivated, even overwhelmed. But what we are often responding to is not the person in their reality, but the fantasy our mind constructs around them. This fantasy provides the illusion of wholeness. In moments of desire, it feels as if their attention, affection, or physical closeness could heal our inner fragmentation, silence our self-doubt, or make us feel alive again. This illusion is especially potent when the other person reflects something we believe we lack. If we struggle with low self-worth, we may be drawn to someone who appears confident, successful, or emotionally self-assured. If we feel emotionally disconnected or numb, we might gravitate toward someone who seems vibrant, expressive, or nurturing. In such cases, the desire is less about mutual recognition and more about psychological compensation. The other becomes an emotional crutch, a symbolic solution to a problem we haven't yet fully acknowledged within ourselves. The danger of this dynamic is that it places the burden of healing or fulfillment onto another person, often without their awareness. We expect their presence to resolve our inner conflict. This creates unrealistic expectations and unhealthy attachments. Rather than relating to them as a full human being, with flaws, limitations, and autonomy, we relate to them as a psychic tool, something we use to fill a gap. This is not love. It is substitution. The connection becomes more about what we receive from them emotionally or symbolically than about who they are in essence. The illusion of wholeness through the other blinds us to the actual work of self-integration. We externalize the solution instead of turning inward to understand what truly needs healing. The momentary bliss or excitement we feel in their presence can easily be mistaken for love, but it is more often a temporary escape from our internal emptiness. The feelings are real, but their source is misidentified. What we're chasing is not the person, but the feeling they temporarily awaken in us. A feeling that originates from within and must be reclaimed from within. When this illusion is eventually shattered, whether through conflict, disappointment, or separation, the underlying emptiness resurfaces, the fantasy crumbles, and the person who once seemed magical or perfect is revealed to be just as human and flawed as ourselves. This moment can feel devastating, not because we have lost love, but because we are forced to confront the void we tried to fill through them. It is a confrontation with our own unmet needs, longings, and disowned inner material. This process, while painful, also offers a vital opportunity to recognize that the path to inner wholeness does not lie in another person, but in the integration of the fragmented self. The illusion of completion through another must dissolve before genuine intimacy can arise. Only then can desire shift from projection to presence, from seeking someone to fix us, to truly seeing and being seen. Emptiness is not always an absence. It is often a presence, a heavy, invisible weight that lingers in the background of our daily lives. It can manifest as restlessness, boredom, anxiety, or a constant need for distraction. Many people walk through life unaware that this sense of emptiness is not a sign of weakness, but a signal from the psyche that something essential has been lost or ignored. At its root, this feeling arises from a disconnection from the inner self. When we do not engage with our inner world, our thoughts, emotions, longings, and fears, we begin to feel hollow. The soul, when neglected, does not disappear, but it grows silent and cold, leaving behind an inner vacancy. This internal disconnection can occur for many reasons. Some people have been conditioned from an early age to suppress their feelings. Others have lived lives of constant busyness or external pressure, where introspection is viewed as a luxury or even a threat. Over time, they lose touch with their emotional and spiritual core. They become strangers to themselves, drifting through routines, relationships, and roles that no longer resonate. The sense of meaning fades, and in its place comes a quiet despair, a longing for something unknown. In this state, the psyche begins to seek substitutes. It craves vitality, not necessarily through depth, but through stimulation. This is where lust often enters. Lust provides an intense jolt of sensation. It gives the illusion of connection, power, and purpose. In the presence of desire, the inner silence is temporarily drowned out. The rush of chemicals in the body, the imagined closeness of another, the fantasy of being wanted or consumed, all of it combines to create a false sense of life. But this kind of life is short-lived and leaves the individual feeling emptier than before. The tragedy is not in the desire itself, but in the way it is misdirected. The individual is not truly seeking physical pleasure or even emotional intimacy. They are seeking themselves. The other person becomes a stage on which they try to reenact a connection they have lost internally. When we are disconnected from our core, we project vitality outward. We look for someone else to awaken our numbness, to spark our passion, to give us back a sense of being alive. But what we are seeking is not in them. It is buried in our own neglected depths. This explains why lust, born of emptiness, feels both urgent and hollow. It burns hot and dies quickly. The moment the stimulation fades, the old emptiness returns, often heavier than before. It is not because the other person has failed us, but because they were never truly the answer. They were a temporary distraction from the work we have avoided, the work of turning inward and reclaiming our inner world. No matter how many people we chase, no matter how many moments of passion we seek, the hunger remains, because it is not a hunger for others, but for self. To understand this dynamic is not to condemn desire, but to understand its deeper layers. True connection and authentic desire arise not from neediness or inner absence, but from a place of inner richness. When we are grounded in ourselves, desire becomes a choice, not a compulsion. But when we are lost to ourselves, desire becomes a cry for help that we misinterpret as love, attraction, or fate. Until we learn to sit with our own emptiness, to explore its contours, and to listen to what it is trying to tell us, we will continue to mistake intensity for connection and lust for fulfillment. The journey inward may feel lonely at first, but it is the only path through which we can reclaim the vitality we so desperately project onto others. The pursuit of lust is often mistaken for the pursuit of connection, but when examined closely, it reveals itself as a compulsive escape from an inner void. People frequently engage in sexual fantasies, pursuits, or encounters not out of a genuine desire for intimacy, but as a means of distraction from the deeper discomforts that lie within them. This pattern becomes particularly evident when the stimulation becomes repetitive, when one finds themselves continuously seeking new partners, more explicit material, or increasingly intense experiences. What's being chased is not the other, but the fleeting moment of oblivion, the escape from the self. This compulsive repetition is a symptom, not a solution. At the heart of it is an attempt to avoid facing emotional emptiness. The stimulation offers a temporary relief from the persistent ache of meaninglessness or loneliness. During the act of pursuit, or in the moments of arousal, the world narrows, and for a brief period the gnawing silence inside is drowned out by intensity. But this intensity is short-lived. Once the climax fades or the novelty wears off, the emptiness returns, often with greater force. The person is left with a sense of confusion or regret, wondering why they still feel unfulfilled after something that should have brought pleasure. This cycle can quickly evolve into addiction, not necessarily in a clinical sense, but as a deeply entrenched habit of psychological avoidance. The mind learns to equate stimulation with escape. The body learns to seek sensation instead of presence. Over time, the threshold increases. What once brought excitement now feels flat. More is required to achieve the same numbing effect. The person becomes desensitized, not just to pleasure, but to subtle emotional cues, to genuine connection, and even to their own internal signals. They are chasing ghosts of vitality, never realizing that what they are truly fleeing from is their own emotional landscape. Such escape mechanisms are not unique to lust. People use food, work, drugs, or constant entertainment to avoid themselves. But lust is unique in that it mimics intimacy. It carries the illusion of closeness, of union, of being seen and wanted. It disguises itself as a longing for the other, when in fact it is a deep-seated attempt to run from the solitude within. The body becomes a battleground for psychological tension. The act of lustful pursuit, while outwardly directed, is actually a conversation the person is avoiding with their own soul. There is also a cultural element to this dynamic. In many societies, stimulation is not just accessible, it is encouraged. We are taught to value speed, distraction, and surface-level gratification. Depth is often treated as a burden. Silence, solitude, and introspection are seen as problems to be solved rather than spaces to be explored. In such an environment, it is no wonder that many turn to lust as a form of relief. It is fast, intense, and easily available. But what is easy rarely satisfies. What is intense rarely lasts. The escape through stimulation is a symptom of disconnection. When one is no longer rooted in their own being, when they have lost the thread of their internal story, they begin to substitute experience for meaning. Lust becomes not a celebration of life, but a substitute for it. In place of reflection, there is impulse. In place of intimacy, there is repetition. The body is present, but the soul is absent. To recognize this pattern is to begin the work of healing. It is to ask uncomfortable questions, to confront the silence, and to learn how to be alone without feeling empty. The desire to escape will not vanish overnight, but by slowing down, by observing the compulsions without judgment, and by choosing depth over distraction, one can begin to reclaim the parts of themselves they had tried so hard to silence. Many people believe that physical desire arises solely from attraction to another person, but in reality it often reflects a deep yearning to be seen, valued, and validated. When someone feels invisible in their emotional world, perhaps ignored, misunderstood, or neglected, they may turn toward lust as a language they believe will make them visible. The pursuit of being desired becomes a way to feel real, to feel acknowledged. In these moments, physical intimacy becomes a symbolic attempt to affirm one's worth. It is not just about the act itself. It is about what the act represents. Being chosen, being wanted, being enough. This longing to be seen can take root early in life. A child who grows up without sufficient emotional validation may learn to associate their value with performance, appearance, or attention from others. If emotional needs were unmet or dismissed, they might carry a deep belief that their true self is not worthy of love unless it is dressed up in something more acceptable: charm, beauty, seduction, or allure. As adults, these individuals may unconsciously use their sexuality as a means of achieving the attention and recognition they were once denied. Lust, then, becomes less about desire and more about reassurance. The feeling of being desired can temporarily relieve inner self-doubt. In the gaze of another, especially one filled with passion or want, the individual feels seen in a way that words or thoughts rarely provide. There is an illusion of closeness, a fleeting suspension of isolation. But this sense of validation is conditional. It lasts only as long as the attention remains. Once the moment is over, the doubts resurface. The person begins to question their worth again. Was it real? Did they actually care? Do I matter outside of being desired? This instability reveals that what is truly being sought is not physical closeness, but emotional recognition. The deeper tragedy is that the individual often does not even realize this is the underlying motivation. They may genuinely believe they are pursuing connection, love, or adventure, but beneath the surface, there is often a wounded child still trying to prove that they are lovable. The external affirmation becomes a substitute for the internal affirmation that was never nurtured. The body becomes a tool, the relationship a stage, and the act of lust a performance in which one's worth is put on trial over and over again. This pattern is particularly painful because it is so easily misunderstood. Others may misinterpret these behaviors as confidence, promiscuity, or even manipulation. But at the core, it is often vulnerability, unspoken and unrecognized. The individual may become trapped in a cycle where they seek desire to feel valuable, but feel less valuable each time the desire fades. It is a painful irony. The more they seek validation through being desired, the more dependent they become on others to feel whole, and the less they feel seen for who they truly are. To be seen is one of the most fundamental human needs, not just noticed, but deeply perceived, recognized not only for one's external qualities, but for one's inner truth. When this need is unmet, the psyche begins to develop compensatory strategies. Lust can be one of the most seductive of these strategies because it offers an immediate, powerful illusion of being seen. But it is only a partial vision, one shaped by projection, fantasy, and roles. It does not offer the soul the true mirror it seeks. What it offers instead is a surface reflection that shatters the moment the attention shifts elsewhere. The path toward healing begins when one recognizes this pattern, not to blame oneself, but to understand. It is only by naming the deeper need, the unspoken longing to be acknowledged, that one can begin to disentangle lust from validation. Being seen is a birthright, not something to be earned through seduction or desire. True visibility comes from revealing the self to oneself first, and then slowly to others, not through performance, but through presence. True intimacy requires vulnerability. It asks us to show not only our desires, but also our fears, insecurities, past wounds, and unspoken hopes. It invites us into a space where masks are removed and the self is exposed in its raw, unguarded form. This is not a space many enter easily, and for those who have known emotional neglect, rejection, or trauma, it can feel almost impossible. Instead of intimacy, many seek the safety of lust. Lust allows for closeness without the risks that come with being truly known. It is a controlled performance where bodies may meet but hearts remain shielded. In this way, lust becomes a form of self-protection. The human mind is often clever in avoiding pain. When emotional exposure has led to suffering, whether through heartbreak, abandonment, or betrayal, it remembers. It learns to guard the self behind walls of control. Lust is a socially acceptable wall. It looks like connection, but it is often carefully choreographed to avoid the unpredictability of emotional truth. There may be passion, but there is rarely surrender. There may be pleasure, but it seldom opens the door to inner healing, because healing only begins when we allow ourselves to be seen as we truly are. This avoidance can become a deeply embedded habit. The body is used as a substitute for the heart, and performance takes the place of presence. The person may crave closeness, but only the kind that doesn't threaten their defenses. They may engage in physical acts while remaining emotionally distant, not because they are cold or indifferent, but because they have learned to fear the consequences of emotional intimacy, to open oneself to another. To risk being seen and not accepted is more terrifying than the loneliness that comes with casual detachment. There is also the illusion of control that comes with lust. Vulnerability is inherently uncertain. It cannot be scripted or guaranteed, but lust can be. It can be initiated, managed, ended, and restarted on terms that feel safer. This illusion of control is comforting for those who have experienced emotional chaos. Lust, in this sense, becomes a kind of emotional armor. It protects the self from disappointment by ensuring that nothing is ever truly at stake. If nothing is deep, nothing can hurt. If no one gets close, no one can leave. Yet beneath this armor lies a deep and often unacknowledged loneliness. The soul longs to be touched, not just the skin. It longs for recognition, not just attraction. Even in the most heated moments of lust, there is often a quiet grief, the unspoken knowing that something is missing. The body is present, but the connection is thin, and once the moment fades, the heart is left untouched, still waiting, still yearning. This kind of intimacy without depth leaves behind not warmth, but an echo of what could have been. The paradox is that while many avoid vulnerability to protect themselves from pain, it is precisely this avoidance that perpetuates their suffering. The absence of intimacy does not remove the fear. It only delays the confrontation with it. Over time, the avoidance hardens into a narrative that people cannot be trusted, that closeness leads to harm, that being known is dangerous. This narrative becomes a prison, invisible but powerful, keeping the person locked out of the very connection they most deeply desire. To choose intimacy over lust is not to reject desire, but to elevate it. It is to allow desire to be guided by truth, by presence, and by mutual recognition. It is not an easy path. It requires the courage to be seen, the strength to be rejected, and the willingness to stay open. But only through this risk can real connection be formed, not the illusion of closeness, but its reality, not a momentary escape from loneliness, but the beginning of its healing. What we often mistake for lust is in truth a reflection of our inner disconnection, the chase, the heat, the obsession. It all masks a silent yearning for something more enduring than momentary pleasure, the desire to be seen, to feel alive, to escape the weight of our own emotional void. Lust, in this light, becomes a mirror, showing us not just what we want, but what we've lost contact with inside ourselves. To move beyond this cycle, we must be willing to turn inward, to face the silence, the fear, the vulnerability we've avoided. True connection does not begin in the body, it begins in the soul, and until we meet ourselves there, we will keep calling it lust when it is, in fact, emptiness waiting to be understood.